Space, a vast and mysterious expanse that has fascinated humanity for centuries. From the twinkling stars in the night sky to the awe inspiring planets and galaxies beyond, space holds endless possibilities for exploration and discovery. Space exploration has led to incredible advances in science and technology, not only expanding our knowledge of space, but also improving our lives on Earth. Many technology advancements we enjoy today are the contribution of innovations in space. Navigation systems, food preservation, medical products, new energy sources, the list goes on and on. What was once a domain of government agencies is now on the cusp of commercialization, with thousands of private companies and startups leading the space innovation. Today, we will learn about the massive opportunities presented by the commercialization of space industry and how innovation in space makes our lives better on Earth. This is Career Calling, and I'm your host, Pratibha Pandit. My guest today is a space industry veteran, Negar Feher. Negar's professional career in space industry spans more than 18 years and includes business and technical leadership roles at Momentus, Maxar, and Lockheed Martin Space Systems. Negar holds a bachelor's degree in aerospace, aeronautical, and astronautical engineering from California State Polytechnic, Pomona, master's degree in aerospace engineering from Stanford University. Negar currently serves on the board of SSPI and as co-chair of Elevating Women Committee. Always a big proponent of sustainability in space, Negar has founded her own consulting practice, Sustainable Space Consulting LLC, to bring her extensive technical and business leadership knowledge in space industry to companies innovating in the space. Hey, Negar, welcome to Career Calling. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
This is one area that I've been fascinated to learn more about because I see so much about space industry on LinkedIn or anywhere I go to the news. So I would like to get familiarized with the basics. In my knowledge, when in the past, when we see the space industry, the only two things that we hear about most is rocket launches or astronauts, right? Those are the things that we are very, very familiar with. But there seems to be so much going on. Help me understand this industry a little bit. Like, what are the different areas, what are the different segments where the work is happening in the space industry?
So, yes, I agree that the media loves to cover like the sexy things, like the rockets, astronauts, and the commercial astronauts and things of that nature. But the infrastructure just isn't typically as, uh, interesting to the media. So you don't hear about it a lot, but it is very necessary in order for us to thrive as a multiplanetary species. And if we really want to, be going to the moon and Mars and beyond, one of the main things that's really needed is to build up the infrastructure that's in space. And what I mean by infrastructure is pretty much like all the infrastructure we have here on Earth will eventually be needed in space. And that includes things like when we land on the moon, we're going to need roads, we're going to need transportation, we're going to need communications, we're going to need ways to transmit and receive data centers, mining, the food industry, and everything else that you see around us. And these are all essential to allowing us to become multiplanetary species. A lot of that work is actually happening behind the scenes and you might not be hearing about it, but people are actively working on, okay, how do we mine in space? Even companies are working on how do we make babies in space? Like, how do you procreate? Like, is it going to work? What's going to happen to the children? How are we going to grow plants and everything else that's needed? But I think what you'll see is a lot of the first industries going are going to be the ones that are laying the foundation. Like, what is basic things you need? Like power, water, food, shelter, all of that's getting set up first. And then once a lot of that gets set up, then all the other ancillary industries will be going. Pharma and biotech are also really interested. And just one last thing, the manufacturing industry, because of the zero gravity nature of space, there's a lot of things you can actually manufacture in space better than what you can do here on Earth. So those industries are doing a lot of experiments. Like you hear about people manufacturing Z-blend fibers and stuff for faster communications and things of that nature right now. And there's a lot of other similar applications on the biotech side too. So that's why it's a very exciting time, and everyone's very excited about Artemis and all the astronauts going. But for one astronaut, there's like a ton of cargo that needs to go along with them to support them. And all of that is still being developed.
Very interesting. Now, all of this is happening on a research basis because it is still not a fully realized thing that we have gone and established on a planet, right? Tell me how the work happens. Is it more at a research phase or is it being tested? Like, where is it?
No, it's actually being developed. A lot of this is being developed commercially, not by the government. And this is kind of in contrast to what you see on Earth. Most of the infrastructure established on Earth is owned, operated, and developed by the government, like our roads, public transport systems, sewage, water, etc. In space, actually, they kind of started to shift this paradigm. And you can see that with the cislunar industry in particular. I'll just give you one example. NASA made an announcement that we're going to put another man and woman on the moon in a few years. And the way that they're going to be supporting a lot of the activities there is through commercial initiatives. One of them is called CLIPS. And what they did is they said, hey, everyone on the commercial side, please develop all the technology we need to land the cargo on the moon. All the lunar landers are now being developed by commercial companies, and NASA is buying from them. And they're doing the same thing for rovers, and they're doing the same thing for all the other infrastructure that they need. So this is a big paradigm shift from what was typically done, where the government says, here's my request for proposal. Here's, what I want. Hey, commercial industry, go build it for me. I'm going to own and operate it. Now they've kind of shifted that. Hey, industry, here's what we need, but we don't want to own and operate it. You guys go build it, find other commercial applications for it, and we'll be another buyer. We'll be a potential anchor tenant. So the moon was just one example of that. They're also doing that with terrestrial things too. So like when we're talking about like Earth observation, there's a lot of satellites out there taking imaging and things of that nature. The government is slowly shifting from a model of I'm going to own all my own spy satellites and take all my images to, okay, I'm going to buy from all these commercial companies that are developing these images for other applications like farming and mining and everything else, because I can get it that much cheaper. And I'm supporting this industry and helping it grow in that sense instead of me wasting all these taxpayer dollars on things that I only need certain times.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I don't remember hearing about anything other than NASA and Lockheed Martin and a few other companies a few years ago. Now there are so many. So that's definitely interesting. But who owns space? Is there any concept like that? Can anybody launch a rocket or a satellite into the space? Who kind of regulation may not be the right word, but who manages, who coordinates all of this?
There's a couple of different international organizations. Actually, nobody owns it. There's a couple of space acts that ensure that. And then in terms of regulating it, there's the International Telecommunications Union, ITU, that kind of regulates frequencies and who's transmitting and what so that people don't start jamming each other when they're trying to communicate. In every country, they have their own entities. Like in the US, we have the FCC and we have NOAA and we have other governing bodies. They kind of monitor that. The same way, with aircraft, you have air traffic control that's monitoring everything. Things in space, we have a similar system that monitor all the objects. Like the Space Force, for example, is monitoring every object in space to make sure things don't collide and cause a lot of junk in space. But really, a lot of is still being decided. Like, for example, if you mine something off an asteroid, do you own it? Does any country have any? It's kind of like the wild, wild west right now, where the laws are still being debated And even with certain countries and entities that get together and agree on it, there could be others that don't join forces on the space acts. So there will be potentially some conflicts in space in terms of some country coming in, like, for example, on the moon. Like China's on there on the backside and nobody knows what they're doing. And the US is going, and who knows? I hope we don't have wars and, Star Wars going on as a result of this, but the space law is still being developed. We've gotten along really well in the geosynchronous sphere, which is a certain orbit that basically orbits at the same rate as the Earth. So it's always looking at the same spot as Earth. In that sphere, the international collaboration has been great. Everyone's agreed, okay, you're going to get this frequency, you're going to do this. We're not trump on each other's territory. When it comes to actual objects in space and landing on them and doing things on them and the resources on them, the jury's still out and people are still trying to regulate that. And it's actually the fact that it's not very clear causes it to be a little bit harder for the commercial companies going after those markets. As far as I understand, if this hasn't changed recently, if you mine something, let's say off of the moon or an asteroid, and you grab it, then it's yours. It doesn't mean it's the jurisdiction of your country that you're from, but I think that company that does that owns it. But that could all change. And it's really interesting to watch. And we're just at the cusp. It's just like the Wild Wild West is a great example because it was the same when people came gold rush to California looking for gold. Everybody was everywhere doing whatever. And it's like, oh, well, is this my property or is it the government's property or who gets the gold once we mine it? It's a similar situation happening right now where everyone's like, oh, there's so many resources. Like there's helium-3, water, and all these other things on the moon. Like once you get to it, then what happens? And from the mining companies in space that I've spoken with, they all believe, based on the current space law, that they would own it, subject to change.
Fascinating, really fascinating. Now, does it mean that all these commercial companies, the startups in the space industry, they have to work with the government agencies primarily? Like, is that the revenue generation model still? It is the government agencies paying them? How does that work?
Yes and no. Yes, it's advised for all the commercial companies to work with the government as another potential customer, but not as their only and sole source primary customer. There are other commercial entities buying from each other. So there's this whole new space economy that's generated. And the way this has happened recently is the cost of launching something to space has come down orders of magnitude. When I started in the space industry, it cost like $100,000 per kilogram to launch something to space. Today, we're down to $5,000 a kilogram to $6,000 a kilogram. And okay, you want to round it up as 10,000. So you see it's an order of 10 lower. So that kind of basically democratized space and allowed a lot more new applications to go to space and created this flourishing economy. And all these commercial players going to space are actually buying from each other. So with a lot of the startups that I worked for previously, majority of our customers were actually other new startups. It wasn't Lockheed and NASA and the government who are the typical buyers in space, which is very exciting to see this kind of developing. There's been billions of venture money going into space because of this whole new frontier that's opened up now and all the potential applications. The same way with the internet boom, there was this whole bubble and everybody was like, oh, Web 1.0, Web 2.0, Web 3.0, we're going to throw all these billions of dollars at it. That's happening in space right now. So we're going from space 1.0 to 2.0 and we're kind of going into like 3.0. It was just very, very exciting time to be in here because not only are the commercial companies all working with each other and the new entrants working with each other, but now the heritage players are trying to work with them too. And you can see that where like Lockheed will partner or buy, small new space companies and buy from Tyvek, or Boeing will buy Millennium Space, or Raytheon buys Blue Canyon, etc. All the big players are now trying to find their space in this new economy that's being established, not just on the launch side, but also on the satellite manufacturing and infrastructure side, which is excellent because in order to have a healthy space economy, you want to have exit strategies for a lot of these companies. Acquired by one of the larger ones with more capital, obviously, is one potential exit strategy for the companies. Another exit strategy you're seeing a lot of recently is SPACs and companies going public through not the traditional IPO process, but through a special purpose acquisition fund. So that's also bolstering this space economy too, and seeing like different ways to get money into this industry to grow it out. The jury's still out on how all these companies that went public are going to do. And if you check on all their stock prices, they're not doing that great because they probably all rushed to get in just because of the lure of all the capital that they could raise.
The shift in the space industry in the last decade has been described by many names. The space renaissance, the commercial space age. And it is not hard to see why. The government-funded, government-directed space exploration activities born in the 60s slowly made way for commercialization with the communication satellite launches in the 80s. As the cost of infrastructure grew and the budgets dwindled, commercial interests consistently grew, with new private investor funding flowing into the private sector, programs that were supportive to commercialization. The industry saw a boom in the last 5 years. According to industry reports, year 2021 alone saw $15 billion of investments over 241 deals. While chances are that you have mostly heard SpaceX and the Blue Origins of the world, in reality, today's space industry is a massive ecosystem of over 10,000 companies, with over 5,000 investors engaging in innovations spanning from traditional navigation, communication to medicine, agriculture, security, artificial intelligence, manufacturing, to a wide variety of other applications that are fundamentally beneficial to Earth.
Common question for especially parents or the youngsters who are thinking about would be, if I'm going into an industry, one is the impact I'm going to have. What is the potential of that industry? Which clearly, I think space, nobody can question because it is clear more than what we read on newspapers. It is not just about taking rich people to space on a tourism. The value is a lot larger from what I'm hearing from you now. So I think
it has a huge impact. There's a lot of books that you can actually read that were actually written back in like the 60s by some authors that kind of predicted what's happening right now. And it's really crazy. If you read them, you're like, wow, these guys knew like 40 years ago or 60 years ago, this is where we would be today. And if you look at the reasons, I think the main thing for parents and people interested in getting into the space industry is to understand why we go to space and what potential it can bring for people on Earth. I often, when I tell people I work in the space industry, they're like, oh, you're crazy. Like, why work in that industry? Like, we have so many problems here on Earth. Why are we going to space? And that's a completely wrong approach. In order to solve a lot of the problems we have here on Earth, we have to go to space. It's such a rich environment to go and be able to get natural resources from, to use for different applications that will benefit humans here on Earth. I mean, I can give you endless examples. I'm horrible at navigation. If the GPS systems didn't exist, I would never find where I'm going. So look at all the benefits, the things you benefit from every day. Lyft, Uber, all those things wouldn't even exist if the space industry didn't exist. You know, it affects everybody's life on a daily basis. No joke. And people don't understand that and they don't put two and two together. Every call you take on your cell phone, all of this Wi-Fi that we benefit from seamlessly everywhere. You know, all of this is thanks to the technologies that were developed for space, some potentially initially for government applications that then made their way in for commercial application. And we're just at the beginning of this. New applications we can use space for to benefit humans is crazy. One of the core things to understand is that using space and going to space will make our life here on Earth more sustainable because we won't have to mine to the umpteen degree all the resources we have here because there's so many other resources there. And if we can come up with sustainable, efficient transportation systems, which the space industry is working on to bring those things back and forth. So you could make a huge impact by working in this industry. And we employ people from all different walks of life. You don't have to be an engineer to work in space. You don't have to be an aerospace engineer, which I happen to be. But honestly, that is not a requirement. You could be in marketing. You could be in business development. You could be a salesperson. You could be a product or technician or literally anything. And you can get employment in the space industry too. So that's another misnomer you'll find, that people think, oh, well, I'm not an aerospace engineer. I can't work in this industry.
Great. I wanted to double click a little bit on the background perspectives. That is very true that, space, the moment we hear space, we think of aeronautical engineering or aerospace engineering, right? That's the common notion.
Yeah.
So what are the other common skills or the experience needed in this industry? Is it any different from software industry, or is there any specific knowledge required to work in space?
Honestly, space industry needs people from all walks of life. We need software engineers to write the code. The main difference in working with space and here on Earth is like the fact that once you send something to space, and it's like gone. And the testing and troubleshooting and all that stuff is very, very different. So I would say the only prerequisite for being able to work in space is to have an open mind, be open to developing new architectures and methodologies and techniques for solving problems. Like, you have to be a good problem solver, because the problems you come across will be very challenging. Trying to figure out how to solve them, you won't have the typical toolbox you have for solving things here on Earth. So if you're a person that likes a challenge, likes to try something new and solve things in a different way, then space is for you. If you want everything to be figured out for you and you just kind of follow in the footsteps of somebody else and it's all like laid out, then it's probably not a good industry for you, because that's pretty rare. We typically employ the best and the brightest in the industry, and we go and solve these problems. It's very exciting. And I would encourage anyone who's curious about it to try. Honestly, anyone who I knew who worked with me in the space industry and then left to work in a different industry always all came back, because they just love the challenge. They love, working on these crazy problems that nobody has ever solved before, that they're the first to figure out. Like, how are we going to communicate with the moon autonomously, real time, etc.? How can we employ AI to do that? And what algorithms would we use, etc.? I think it's very, very intriguing. And that's, since college, what attracted me to the space industry. I could have worked with the airline industry and work on airplanes too. But the lure of solving and developing new things that have never been done before is kind of what I get really excited about. Now, not to say that there's not a segment of the space industry which kind of does things over and over again, right? There are big factories pumping out hundreds of satellites that are kind of pretty much the same thing with minor modifications, similar to the auto industry. There is a segment of the space industry that's like that. But the segment that I'm personally most excited about, the new one being developed today. And I think we need a lot more people working on those problems.
So in an emerging industry that is so rapidly growing, how does the students of today who are in high school or, or middle school even, how should they prepare? Is there anything that they should do, to any activities or any orientation in terms of what they're learning, the courses they're picking, they should orient towards space?
What I
would you recommend?
Is basically working on their problem solving skills and challenging themselves with new problems every day. Of course, studying and taking more electives on math and science. And once you get to high school, like if your high school offers it, physics and earth sciences and things of that nature would be very helpful. And follow the news, read about everything that's going on currently in the space industry, and try to, think about it strategically in terms of what area of the space industry are people not working on? And where are those niches? And start thinking about, okay, what could I do to fill in those gaps? There's so many of them, and solves those problems that nobody's working on yet. And then once you get to like college level, I'd highly recommend internships, co-ops. Make sure you intern various companies every summer. And then if you can manage the time, do co-ops throughout your college career, do those. I've even had some of the companies I work for hire interns from high school. So some companies are willing to do that too. And that's like the best experience you can get, because you can basically experience everything firsthand and see if you like it or not. I did a different internship every summer, and that really helped me kind of figure out what I wanted to do. Like I worked for an aircraft company, and then I worked for like a spacecraft company, and then I worked for the government, like JPL. And I kind of figured along the way what I don't want to do when I grow up. And then it kind of helped me figure out what I do want to do. The last advice I'll say is be really open to challenging your beliefs of what you want to do when you grow up. Because you might think today, I don't know, I'm going to be an opera singer when I grow up, or I'm going to be a fireman or whatever. And be okay with that changing every year or every 5 years or whatever. Even when you grow up as an adult and you start working, people change their careers so much. And that's totally fine. And actually, that's good, because it makes you a more well-rounded employee or an entrepreneur. You learn all the different aspects. So be open to that and try as many different career paths as you can in your life. Figure out, what do I get excited to wake up to doing every morning? It took me like 10, 15 years to figure out what I want to do when I grow up. And I'm still in that journey. I think I figured out kind of area of work that I love doing the most. But in what aspects do I want to do, and what kind of role do I want to do in that is another question that you have to ask yourself, and be okay with making mistakes. Don't criticize yourself. Be like, you know what? I tried it. I loved it. Or I tried it and I hated it, and I don't want to do that again. And those are all important life lessons that I hope you all give yourselves the opportunity to do. For the little kids, just exposure to different kinds of STEM activities, building things. I remember growing up loving to play with my Legos, and I had a computer from a really young age, playing on the computer. Parents who hate video games, honestly, it's not bad for the kids to play video games. You should allow your kids to play video games. Now, don't let them do it obviously 24/7, but that could be inspiring too. Anything that basically piques their interest, encourages them to explore new things, should be where you look.
For you, was there any defining moment when you thought space is my thing?
Yeah. I think once I realized the importance of the space industry and the various applications and how many people it reached and what impact it had, is when I decided that, wow, like space is a place to be. It's actually, compared to all of the industries, it's a pretty small one. And if you look at the total addressable market and revenue streams and things of that nature, but it has a very profound impact. And I'm a big proponent for sustainability. And I find that working in the space industry helps us become more sustainable in the long run. I truly believe that if we utilize space in the right way, we can make life here on Earth much, much more sustainable for generations to come. And that to me is super exciting. And you'll see this wave of movement in the space industry of people trying to make everything reusable. You see reusable rockets. People are building reusable satellites. We're trying to figure out how to upgrade and service objects in space. And there's a whole satellite servicing market. Like, imagine having something like AAA roadside assistance in space. All of these are emerging markets that are being developed today that really, really excite me, because that's what we really because the way space was traditionally done is like, imagine an aircraft taking off from Tokyo, going to San Francisco. And once it lands in San Francisco, we throw the aircraft away and then we make another one. That's the way space was traditionally done. But now, thankfully, we've moved away from that model and we're building things that are more reusable, refuelable, serviceable, and can be sustainable in the long run. And you're seeing this push all the different sectors in space, right? That's very cool.
Space is a very STEM focused industry, right? It's area which is very much science, physics, and math. But you went into more of a business roles. Was that something as a natural progression, career path, or that is something that you designed? And how did you go about it?
Yeah, so I started out as an engineer. I got my bachelor's and master's in aerospace engineering. And when I was working, I realized after doing that for 10 years that it didn't get me that excited. Like, I would solve a problem, build something, test something, break something. And I was just kind of like, okay, that's cool. Like, done. Check. Next. It was becoming very monotone for me after a while. And I tried all the different types of engineering, from systems engineering to research and development to program management and managing the engineers and doing product. And after a while, I decided that it wasn't that cool for me. And thankfully, our chief technology officer at the company I was working at the time had some sort of competition going on. He's like, oh, well, he called it the Blue Ocean Network. Like, all this tech that we're developing today, guys, with the advent of all the Web 2.0, Web 3.0 stuff, is going to become obsolete. So we're not going to need DirecTV and Sirius Radio and all the other stuff that we were building. And he's like, we need to figure out how to diversify beyond this. And what can we do strategically, given the type of talent and resources we have, to expand beyond this product line? And that got me actually really excited. And I was already doing product work and product design and product development. And I participated in the competition and I actually won. And the prize was that you got to join his organization and actually establish these new entities. So I got to establish a whole new department, build new services and products that helped diversify the product offering for the whole company. And that was kind of the beginning of my exposure to the front end of the business. I worked on everything from proposals to customer engagements, to giving them tours, to onboarding customers and managing them, etc. I started to fall in love with business development and that whole process. And I felt like, oh, this is what I really do, not engineering side of the house anymore. And I'm still going through that journey right now, honestly. Like, as I don't have an MBA. I never studied business. And I'm still learning. And that's very exciting to me. Like, learning and working with the lawyers and all the different types of contracts and things that you can do, learning from the customers, learning on the product development side. And I'm very, very thankful to that CTO. His name was Jenna Mateo. I saw him at a conference a couple of weeks ago and I gave him a big hug and I'm like, thank you so much for putting me on this career trajectory. And having a technical background really actually helps, because when I work with customers and stakeholders and partners, I can completely understand what they're talking about. So it's not like they have to explain to me everything. I know where they're going and I can help them also with their strategy and business development, go to market and everything as well, which is what I've started to do recently, which is just consulting with a lot of small space companies and helping them figure out what their go-to-market strategy should be, what kind of products they should be developing, which customers to go after, how to raise money, how to build out their business. And my learning journey continues.
Yeah, awesome. That's really fascinating journey. Truly. And this is so This has been so fascinating. I learned a lot today about the space industry.
You're
Thank you so
welcome.
much for your time and all the knowledge that you shared. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome. And thank you so much for having me.
That is Negar Feher, a space executive and a public speaker. To learn more about space industry, please check the description section of the YouTube video. This is Career Calling, and I'm your host, Pratibha Pandit. Thank you for tuning in.